Our castaway this week is an actor, star of very many films in this country and abroad. It's Stewart Granger. Well, it's nice to see you back in London, Jimmy. Are you staying in London? You living
yes,
here?
for the moment. But Roy, I was just counting. What is it, 34 years ago when I first did this with you? It's
Yes,
34 years ago,
34
isn't it?
years ago. And you
haven't changed, you know. I got it in
Snap.
first. You haven't changed.
Right,
Yeah,
let's pretend we've never done it before.
All right, we've never done it before, right?
This desert island proposition. You have 8 discs to make life a little better. Is music important to your life?
Well, I was saying to you, Roy, remember when we were having a discussion, it's a strange thing that when I was married with a family and sort of a home, and we had an existence that was ordered, more or less ordered. Music was very important to me, but in the last 20 years, looking back, traveling around, I was living in Rome, I was living in Switzerland, you know, I was living in Spain. I never listened to the radio. I never play records, because not having a home that I loved, I didn't have sort of my collection with me.
Quite.
That's why it's very difficult to choose, and that's why you'll find that some of the ones I've chosen are going back to when I first did them with you.
What's the first one you've chosen?
Well, I've chosen Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto because the very first job I had was in the Hull Rep, and I was in a play called The Shining Hour, and I had to play the piano, and I had to play this Tchaikovsky concerto. And I got so carried away because they played this record off stage and I was miming it, you see. I used to get carried away and forget to say the lines I'm supposed to say, you see. The actress would sort of look at me and tap her heel. Oh, yes. And then I'd ask her the line. Anyway, it's very, very effective and very dramatic and theatrical, and I love it.
An excerpt from Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto in B-flat minor, the Boston Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Erich Leinsdorf, and Arthur Rubinstein as soloist, and he wasn't saying anything either.
He was better than I was. Yeah.
You talked about your early job in Hull Rep. Let's go further back than that. Now, you're a Scot, aren't you?
Yeah.
On your father's
Well,
side.
my father was a pure Scot. I was sort of English Scot. You know.
He was a soldier, your father?
Oh, from way back. His father was a soldier, his grandfather, great-grandfather, you know. Yeah.
But on your mother's side, I believe the arts took over.
Oh, yes. Mummy's, well, I don't know which, my great, I think, grandfather was Luigi Leblanche, who was the greatest basso profondo in the world. Incidentally, there's a collection, in the Wallace collection, of his snuff boxes, in which he had 365. He was given by all the crowned heads of Europe 365, and I believe there's a 366th, which was given him by Queen Victoria for leap year. And he taught her singing, Queen Victoria singing. Yeah. So that's why I've chosen a record by Chaliapin, because the tragedy of my great was that he died before they had recordings. And Chaliapin was the great basso profondo, so I think he probably had a voice very like my great-grandfather.
What are we going to hear?
I've chosen Glory to Thee, O Lord, sung by Shaliapin, which I think is a lovely record.
От сия души и от всего помышления нашего Господи, Вседержитель, Боже, Отец наших, молим Тися, услыши и помилуй нас, Боже, по великой милости Твоей, молим Тися, услыши и помилуй. Еще молимся о великих вселенских православных святейших патриарсих, о преосвященных епископе и всей во Христе братья наши.
Glory to Thee, O Lord, a Gretchaninov setting sung by Fyodor Shaliapin. Right, now, the arts on your mother's side, martial matters on your father's side. What was your ambition as a boy? What did you want
to be a doctor.
Really?
I was a rebel from very young, and I didn't want to go in the army because I always had a feeling that somebody got in there 2 weeks before you and they'd be bossing you around for the rest of their lives, because they had seniority. But a doctor, I really wanted to be a doctor. I think it was a calling. But I didn't want to be a GP, you see, because I'm a bit lazy, aren't I? And I want to be a Harley Street specialist, Anyway, my father lost a lot of money, and he said he couldn't afford to send me to... Well, he could afford to send me to university and college, but after that I'd had to be on my own, because if you're a specialist, people don't go to a 25-year-old specialist. You have to buy into a practice, you have to study a long time. So I said, I'll bum around, and that's how I sort of fell into being an actor. It wasn't a calling with me at all.
How did that start? Did you go to an acting school?
No, I sort of ran into somebody who said, do you have a good wardrobe? And I said, well, I don't know what you mean. He said, what, do you have tails and dinner jackets? I said, well, I've got dinner jackets, a bit blue, a bit green, because it's second hand. He said, you have a car? Yes, overland whippet, called the fire engine. It was bright red. He said, well, become a film extra. He said, you get a guinea a day and you meet fabulous girls, you see. So become a film extra. I became a film extra. And I remember the first day I worked, I was being pushed into different rooms and said, put that on your face, bright orange, Yes, Roy in our day, they used to use these arcs, bright orange makeup. And there's an awfully good-looking young fellow sitting next to me. And I said, you done much of this? He said, no, it's my first day. I said, oh, really? Why are you doing it? He said, well, you get a guinea a day and you meet these lovely girls. So I said, oh, that's, that was Michael Wilding. So we had a ball for 2 years. And then, another fluke. I won't go into it because it takes too long, darling. But I fell into being an actor, and that's how I got to the Hull Rep. And played the Tchaikovsky Concerto.
That was your first professional engagement?
Yeah, Hull Rep.
At how much?
£3 a week. But you remember in those days, Roy, I remember we stayed at a lovely Yorkshire woman who had 5 daughters who looked after me. It was 25 bob a week, all in. That's 3 big smashing meals a day.
Oh, yes, you could.
And the daughters, darned my socks, washed my... they were lovely. 25 bob a day. Can you imagine?
And then you moved on to Birmingham. That was one of the...
That was a fluke, yes. I managed to get a job in the Birmingham Rep.
One of the best reps in the country.
The best. In those days, it was the place to go. Where I met Elspeth, my first wife. Elspeth March was the leading lady there.
What took you to Birmingham?
Well, I had a row with Peppino St. Angelo of the Hull Rep, who was only paying me £3 a week for supporting parts, and I suddenly found I was playing leading parts. So I went into him and said, I think I should get more than £3 a week, you see. And he said, you're lucky to have a job at all. He was quite right, of course. But I was very arrogant. I said, well, I shall go to the Birmingham Rep. He said, you should be so lucky, And I went back to London, and the person who got me the introduction to the theatre, which was a woman called Susan Richmond, was my doctor's wife, who taught at the Webber Douglas School of Dramatic Art, where I learned to be an actor, I went to her and I said, I made an ass of myself. I said to this man that I'm going to get in the Birmingham Rep. Now, what the hell do I do? She said, well, it's incredible, but Cyril Phillips, the secretary of the Rep, is holding auditions. I said, can you get me in? He said, well, I might. She said, I know him. So in I go. And I give him this nonsense about I've, been a film actor. I was a film extra, But I gave it up to be a serious actor, and I've been playing leads in the Hull Rep for a long time. It was, I think, 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And he said, well, I can only offer you £7 a week because Stephen Murray is the leading man. He's leaving in 6 months. But would you be prepared to pay second leads at £7 a week for 6 months, then you will take over as leading man for £10 a week? I said, well, give me a little to think it over. I said, yes, like 3 seconds. And was able to go back to Peppinus and Angelo, who said to me with a sneer, I suppose you're going to the Birmingham Rep? I said, yes, sir, in 2 weeks. He said, no. I said, yes. How much are they paying? I said, they start at £7, and then they go on to £10. He said, well, I must say, he said, congratulations. I shall hate to lose you. Mm-hmm. And that's how I do. You see, that's why people come to me and say, my daughter or my son wants to go into the movie business or the theatre. How do I advise them? How do I advise them? It's luck.
Yes.
It's timing, luck. A lot of application, a little bit of talent, timing and luck.
What was your first London appearance in the theatre?
Now wait a second. Oh yes, The Sun Never Sets, and it's set in 3 weeks. It was a big smash at Drury Lane. Drury Lane, directed by Basil Dean, with Leslie Banks and Edna Best. In fact, the only thing it was famous for, I believe, is the Guinness Book of Records. It was the shortest appearance by any leading actress in the West End Theatre, because Edna Best was playing the heroine, and at the opening, her first night, Leslie and I are tied to 2 columns by the, it's about Sanders of the River.
Yes.
And she is brought on the head of an enormous black and carried across stage to be dressed as the goddess or something. And she went off, and then there's a 15 seconds interval, and on comes, should be Edna Best, dressed as a goddess, and on comes the double, the understudy. Mm. And Leslie and I look at each other, pulled. But apparently what had happened was that this great giant had turned too close to the proscenium arch and had cracked Edna Best's head. Blood poured. So she was taken off. So I think that's the shortest appearance. That was also my short appearance in the West End.
And then you went to the Old Vic.
Yeah. Well, after that, I decided we should get married, Elspeth and I. And I had this contract with Basil Dean. Although this thing had come off, he still had to pay me 30 quid a week, you see.
Yes.
And we're going to get married. We've taken an apartment in Swan Court, Flood Street.
Yes.
I hear that Larry Olivier is doing Serena Blandish at the Gate Theatre with Vivian Leigh. So I go down and I test for it. I get the job. And I say, well, there's one problem, and I'm under contract to Basil Dean. But don't go away. I'll be back in an hour. And I went and said, I'll give you back your contract. And he jumped at the chance, which was not fairly unflattering. And I rushed back, and it was £3 a week at the Gate. So I'd given up £30 a week to play, £3 a week at the Gate, and we got married on that.
What was the very first film you did? A film with lines,
well,
as distinct from crowd work?
I can't remember, but somebody said, they said it's, So This Is London, I think. Mm-hmm. So This Is London.
Don't remember that
with
one.
A girl called Carla Lehman. There's a girl called Carla Lehman. We were the juveniles, and Alfred Drayton and Robertson Hare were in it. I don't think I was a great success. Nobody asked me to be in a film after that. So I always consider that the first film I made was Man in Grey.
Well, that was after you had a couple of years in the army during the war.
I'd been in the army, and we had a lot of sort of disasters and tragedies and things in the army, and I got invalided out. And a lot of people asked me why I was such a sort of, they called me belligerent, or what is the other word they always use me, arrogant actor. It wasn't really sort of belligerent, it was guilt. You see, I came out in beginning of 43, and I'd been in the Gordon Highlanders as a private, a very tough regiment, and I was commissioned to the Black Watch as an officer, 6th Battalion Black Watch. And just when I was invalided out, my battalion, Invasion Div, was sent to North Africa, and they had received 100% casualties. They were wiped out. And I felt a kind of a guilt thing that I should have been with them, you see. And when I became a film star and people started interviewing me and saying, what's your favorite color? And I thought this was ridiculous. People were dying. Who cares about my favorite color? And the boys, I remember the boys on the set were complaining that the tea was late, the tea wagon. Tea, it's 4 o'clock, and where's the tea wagon? Oh, you'd be in the Gordons, old boy, and you'd be lucky to get tea at all at any time. Which made me, not that I was belligerent, but I didn't sort of pay enough, how do you say, abeyance? To the press, you're supposed to be terribly polite.
Enough deference, enough
deference,
cooperation.
that's the word, deference. Because to me it was all a lot of nonsense. People were dying.
Anyway,
But in
that
those
first
days,
film, The Man in Grey,
The Man in Grey did it.
A smash hit, wasn't
Yes,
it?
it was a smash. It was a lovely part. You couldn't fail.
And that earned you a long-term contract.
I'm afraid.
Did you
yes.
want a long-term
No, of course
contract?
not. Of course not. I'm a rebel.
Well, you made a dozen and a half British films during those great post-war boom years. Titles at random: Madonna,
Much against
the
my
Seven
will.
Moons, Love Story, The Lamp Still Burns, Blanche.
Caravan.
Which were the good ones?
Oh, the ones in it.
Really?
Man in Grey was lovely, but Fanny by Gaslight, well, it's all right. Puffin Asquith, he was a good director, and James Mason's a lovely actor, and Phyllis is sweet, but it was pretty melodramatic, Victorian melodrama. Caravan was ghastly. Madonna of the Seven Moons was but very popular, you see.
Yes.
The point was, if they made films in those days like they make today, they wouldn't go. People wanted escapism. They had enough horror and enough reality, and the bombs coming down, and the rationing, and couldn't get clothes. They wanted complete escapism, and this is what we gave them.
Oh, the romantic nonsense.
Oh,
it
romantic
was a
nonsense,
time.
yes, but they loved it.
One factor you've overlooked. Me. You see, I'm not a gentleman. I swear by God that if she comes to any harm through you, I'll break that lovely neck of yours with less regret than I'd stamp on a snake. Good night.
Let's have another record. What
All
now?
right, now what should we have? Oh, well, let's have one. I'll tell you why I've chosen this one. I was in Cornwall, my beloved Cornwall, where I was as a kid, and we were doing Love Story, right?
Yes.
And Maggie Lockwood had to play the piano, and they did this Cornish rhapsody they wrote for her to play. But the real reason I'm playing it is because Elspeth, my wife, my first wife, when we were staying in this little farmhouse at Cape St. Just, right on the southern tip of Cornwall, swears that was where Jamie, my son, my firstborn, was conceived. So it's very close to my heart, this concerto that is going to be played now.
The Cornish Rhapsody from the film Love Story in 1944, starring Margaret Lockwood and Stewart Granger, and Leo Litwin was at the piano. Now, after all those films, you elected to return to the stage. You went with Jean Simmons, later to be your wife, to play in Tolstoy.
It's the biggest mistake I ever made in my life. I wanted to go back to the theatre, and we had offers to do all the commercial plays possible, because, I mean, here was a pretty good commercial packet. Stewart Granger and Jean Simmons in 1949, 48, 49, was a pretty commercial packet, right? And I decided, poor darling Jean didn't get a say, did she? Because she'd never been in the theatre, so I had to choose what she went in. I chose this very heavy Tolstoy, which had never been done before, because it was a challenge. You see, I wanted to do something worthwhile. I wanted Jean to be in something worthwhile, not some... do you know what they wanted us to do? Private Lives. Can you imagine Jean Simmons playing Gertie Lawrence part? I mean, she was all of 19.
Yes.
Never been in the theatre before in her life. It's very different from being a film star, you know. I couldn't have played the Noel Coward part anyway, so that made two of us. But we chose this very heavy thing, Power of Darkness by Tolstoy, and I lost every penny I had in it.
You were just about the top man in British films at that time, but you elected to pull up your roots and go off to Hollywood. Was that for money?
I want to, before we go there, I want to go back a little, because I've chosen another record, which is long before I went to Hollywood, which is the Paganini Concerto, because I played in The Magic Beau.
Oh, you played Paganini,
You
of course.
remember I played Paganini.
Yes.
So let's go back there first. And I was forced. I didn't want to play Paganini. You know, I was forced to do it. They said, your next film is Paganini and the Magic Bow. And I said, don't be stupid. Look at these hands. There are boxer's hands. I'm supposed to play
Yes,
violin.
I wouldn't say it was first-rate visual casting.
It wasn't
somehow.
exactly, was it? But I had a man called David McCullum, who was the leader of the Philharmonic, who got me enthused about the Stradivarius and Guarnerius, these two geniuses in one little town, little village of Cremona, and two streets. I mean, it was incredible. And Yehudi Menuhin was going to do the recordings. And I remember thinking, I don't know how to play the violin. I'll go and watch him, you see, and he'll show me how to act a violinist. But he did nothing, of course. He put the thing under his chin, closed his eyes, and played this magical music. And I remember how sweet he was, because he had a wonderful Stradivarius. And at the end, when he'd finished recording, all the violinists of the Philharmonic would come and say, what a lovely violin, do you like mine? You know, and he'd take their, I don't know what it was, but it was not a Stradivarius, and play a little and say, what a beautiful tone it has, because he could make any violin sound like a Guarnerius or Stradivarius. And I also did a terrible thing. I can tell this little story against myself. The sweet man, David McCullum, lent me his own Stradivarius for the actual take, but I'd rehearse, I'd use a mock-up, you know, just a cheap thing. And he knew I was a bit short-tempered, and it was terrible, these stumps of hands trying to get the right movement and everything. And I'd throw this damn violin across the room and smash it and all sorts of things. And one day, when we're taking it, I can't remember what it was, but it was a very, very difficult bit. And I was getting rather short-tempered. But I kept my sense of humor, and he used to come up and hand me the Strad, and I'd hand the fake one to the prop man. As he turned his back and walked back towards the camera, I switched them, you see, so that the prop man had the real Strad, and I had. And we start the scene, and I lose my temper. I pretend to lose my temper and smash this Stradivarius. Smashed it on a table. And David McCullum, I thought he'd know I wouldn't have done a thing like that. I thought he'd laugh at the joke. He didn't. He fainted. He fainted, smack on the ground, you see. So I rushed up, and I took the Stradivarius from the prop man, and I said, David, I'm smacking his face. David, darling, it's all right. Look, it's here. And he came out, and he said, oh, Jimmy, how could you do that? You know, and I said, David, I didn't. It's here. It was a joke. Laugh. You know, and his tears were flowing. Oh. It was dreadful. And in the end, he was so sweet, because he said, well, here it is. I'll give it back to you, and I'll go and play it properly. And I did it properly. I did it beautifully for him. You know, he was a sweet, sweet man. Anyway, because of that, I'm going to play the Paganini Concerto, played by Yehudi Menuhin, that we used in the film.
An excerpt from the first Paganini concerto in D major, Yehudi Menuhin with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Now, you were just about the top man in British films, but you decided to pull up your roots and go off to Hollywood.
One had to, you see. To be an international star, you've got to go to Hollywood. And as I say, I'd reached my peak, and I didn't plan to go to Hollywood. As you know, if you read the book, I'd planned to produce and direct. And I'd bought this lovely book by Rumer Godden called The House by the Sea, and it was either Betty Davis or Katharine Hepburn playing this middle-aged woman. And there's a young actor coming along called Marlon Brando, I'd heard of him. He was in the theatre. He hadn't made a film. I thought, how am I going to use him? He had to play this young killer. And I wanted to produce and direct, right? Then I lost my money in the thing. I owed the income tax. And I got this chance to do King Solomon's Mines. And I did it, and then, we signed another contract. So here I am in America, under contract.
Hello, Alan.
Oh, hello, Eric. Come on, sit down.
Bad trip?
Oh, I was paid.
I hear you lost Qually. He was a good man.
Yes, the best. I'll miss him. He was with me 8 years.
Want to take on another party? Had an inquiry today.
No, not this time, Eric.
These people seem pretty decent and willing to pay almost anything.
No, not anymore. I've had enough. I think I'm through. Well, perhaps I'll do this house up a bit, send for my son.
Bring the boy out here. It's no life for a child. How old is he now?
He's almost 7.
I can understand you're wanting to see him. But isn't he better off where he is? English schools, all that?
Oh, perhaps I'll go back to England for good. I've thought of that, too.
What would you do there? Become a shopkeeper? This is a mood, Alan. I've seen it growing on you the past few months. You've been alone too much. England's no place for you. You've built a career here. Don't toss it away. The happiest, finest fate a man can have in this world is to be the best at something. You may not realize it, but your reputation spread to England, too.
Have another drink.
Oh, I mean it. Today, that pair from London who were looking for a guide, they knew your name. Ever meet a man called Curtis? Henry Curtis?
No. Curtis? Yes, there was a fellow about 18 months ago, an Englishman. Tried to get me to go west into unexplored country. Had some crazy sort of notion about a lost diamond mine.
That's the man.
Yeah, well, I turned him down. It sounded like romantic foolishness. See, the fellow wants to go hunting now.
No.
Had a letter from him about 7 or 8 months ago. No, it was asking about him. Didn't make any sense.
It was his wife, Mrs. Curtis, who tried to engage you today.
A woman? A woman on safari? No, thank you.
Now, in Hollywood, it wasn't so much romantic parts that you had played in England. It was swashbuckling.
Well, they were romantic, you know. And there's nothing more romantic than Scaramouche, is there? Prisoner of Zenda, or Young Bess, or King Solomon's Mines. I mean, that leopard skin hat, that's pretty romantic. I was very lucky. Look, in 2 countries I blew it because I signed the long-term contract. Mm-hmm. But I had the chance. I had Man in Grey, which was a wonderful part in England. And the first time America really saw me commercially everywhere was in King Solomon's Mines, where I played this, I think, very romantic character with a leopard skin. And can I tell you how we came about a leopard skin hat? Hollywood dressed me up as they thought I should be dressed, which was not as you dress as a white hunter in Africa. And I had the luck to be introduced to Phil Percival, who was the doyen of white hunters. And I was a great fan of his because he'd taken Ernest Hemingway out on safari. And I went to him, and he sort of giggled a bit when I came in and what Metro thought I should wear. He said the most important thing, he said, we can knock down the pants and they wear a gun and, you know, all that. But he says, the hat's terrible, isn't it, Jim? He said, he looks as if it's from Miami, Florida. And what are we going to do? So he said, well, I knew somebody who used to wear a snakeskin around his hat. So he brought out a snakeskin, shoved it around this enormous hat. And that didn't look right. That still looked like Florida. And he said, oh, I've got it. He said, there's a fellow who used to wear a leopard tail round his hat. Well, it was so thick, the leopard tail. But I liked the idea. And so we cut off a strip, you see, and shoved it round the hat, and it looked wonderful. So that's how we came to be the first people to wear leopard skin round the hat. And I noticed, and I've been back on safari, 20 times, that they're selling in Kenya hats with leopard skins round. Everywhere you go, they're not real leopard skin, they're fake leopard skin.
Yes.
But everywhere you go in East Africa, they're selling. I wish I'd, patented. I could have made some money.
They gave you some gorgeous leading ladies in Hollywood.
Yes, didn't do badly, did I? Rita Hayworth, Deborah Kerr, Elizabeth Taylor, Gene Simmons, Sid Charisse. Oh, blimey, I've forgotten. Ava Gardner, my beloved Ava Gardner.
There is only one woman, and she is here in this room at this moment.
You're such a liar.
At times.
A liar, cheat, and a fraud. Also an imposter.
In those days, in your big time in Hollywood, they were opening out. They were using real locations instead of studio mock-ups.
Oh, yes.
So you were getting about the place.
Oh, God, yes. Yes. When I was in South America, and I was in Canada on the borders for another film, and in India, you know. I think that's what smashed up my marriage, actually, was we were always separated.
Yes, of course.
You know, a marriage doesn't stand long separations.
Jean was busy somewhere else.
Well, she
on
was
another
busy. She never
occasion.
could travel. Anyway, you know, a wife to be on location with you is dreadful for her. She's sitting at home in a tent all the time while you're working. That was awful. Well, to go back to King Solomon's Mines, I mean, we were in Africa 5 months, and, you know, we were suffering from malaria and dysentery and amoebic. You know, it really was rough. It was really rough. But at least, I've seen the film, you know, quite recently. And although the love story is pretty old-fashioned, the locations and the animal shots are sensational because we were there. And that it's proven it really counts if you're really there. If they'd built it on the back lot at Metro, it wouldn't have been the same, would it?
Yes. Yes, for you, the 50s in particular were golden years for movies.
Yes.
They tell me that you're quite a good soldier, Captain Brummel. They tell me, moreover, that you don't take kindly to discipline, that you're a gambler, that you drink too much.
What is too much for one man might not be considered too much for another, sir.
Don't interrupt me. All in all, you're a bit of a nonconformist. And tell me, Captain, what do you hope to gain by knocking society about?
In my idea, sir, society is very imperfect. There's a great deal I'd like to change.
Revolutionary.
It's the age of revolution, sir. In America, in France, it's in the air.
Oh, one moment, Captain. I'm disposed to overlook the presumption of this afternoon, and I'm sure that now that you've thought it over, you've changed your opinion of my uniform.
I haven't, sir. But since your Royal Highness has indicated a desire to forget the matter, I shall be glad to do the same.
You'll forget it? Dimmy, sir, you're an impudent pup.
I suggest an instant apology, Captain.
An apology is offered to one you have affronted. It seems to me that I have been affronted. However, I do not wish to make a point of it. Have I your Royal Highness's permission to withdraw? I have some packing to do before fall-in.
You can ignore the fall-in, Captain.
Am I to understand, sir, that I am not to serve abroad?
You're not to serve anywhere, sir. I won't have you in my regiment. Get out!
Let's have another record.
I'm going to choose one that I've got no anecdote about. It's not connected with me in any way of any. It's called Yesterday.
Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me. Oh, yesterday came suddenly. Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say. I said, something wrong, now I long for yesterday. Yesterday. Love was such an easy game to play. Now I need a place to hide away. Oh, I believe in yesterday. I said, something wrong, now I long for yesterday. Yesterday. Love was such an easy game to play. Now I need a place to hide away. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Yes, I believe in yesterday.
Yesterday by Frank Sinatra. Now, you have mentioned it once or twice. You've written a book. And it's
no, I haven't
unusual.
written a book. I've written an autobiography.
Yes. It's unusual. It's unlike most film star autobiographies. You wrote it yourself.
Yes, for sure.
Was there any opposition to that?
Yes. I mean, I had a ghostwriter, because you see, I wrote it because I thought it was easy money. You got a ghostwriter, and the publishers came and offered you a lot of money to publish the book and everything. Not true. Well, not for me anyway, because a ghostwriter, he's probably a much better writer than I am. But he doesn't write the way I speak. He's not me. The publisher and my agent got very worried and said, what are you going to do? Who are we going to get? Are you sure you're right about this? And I said, well, I'll show you why I think I'm right. So I wrote in longhand what I thought this chapter should be. So I gave it to my agent, who showed it to the publisher, and he said, that's what it should be, you see. And I said, but Jim, and then why don't you write it? I said, I can't write a letter, you know. Of course you can, there it is. So that's how I picked up the pen on December the 20th, I think, and started in May the 6th, 1913. I was born, and I thought, that's an awful beginning, we'll have to change that. And I wrote it, and it was fairly traumatic.
How long did it take you?
Well, the actual writing took 5 months, but I'd made tapes for 2-3 months before in Spain for this ghostwriter who then had to leave. So the actual writing was 5 months. Then I found another terrible thing was finding photographs, because I think David Niven had planned at the age of 17 to write an autobiography, because he seemed to have collected, photographs from way back when he was an extra.
You haven't kept
No, I mean, for instance, Spencer Tracy was our best friend. I mean, my daughter was named after Tracy. He was the godfather of the daughter with Jean. I haven't got one photograph with Spencer Tracy, because I wouldn't think when he came to our home to say, Spence, would you mind having a photograph taken with me? For a film actor to say, would you have your photograph taken? That was like a slap in the face, isn't it? So all these people that I knew so well, I never had photographs taken with them.
No stills kept?
None. So to search for stills of me, they're mostly I managed to get one or two pretty good ones. You've seen them, have you?
I have. Well,
they're
I've
not
seen
bad.
the book, yes.
They're not bad.
You haven't told us what the book's called.
Oh, I thought you'd told her that.
No, I haven't said a word about it.
I can't remember. What's it called? Sparks doing something? Sparks fly upwards? Yes, sparks fly upwards.
Yes,
It's from the Bible, my dear chap. From the book of Job. Man is born unto trouble as the sparks fly upward. And this book is about trouble, wouldn't you say?
Well, an awful lot of it seems to be yours and other people's.
Yes, I know. I hope I gave a little trouble, because they sure as heck gave me some trouble.
When did you make your last film? What was it?
The last film was called The Last Hunt. Oh, well, I don't count the one. The one I did a sort of a cameo shot with Richard Burton. I don't count that. I did a guest shot on a film because he was a friend of mine. The producer was a friend of mine, and they said, would I come and do a show? my last film was called The Last Safari, which was a bit heartbreaking. It was made by a very unpleasant character called Henry Hathaway. He really was, I think, the most unpleasant director I've ever worked with in my life. He was a charming man off the set. You go to his home, a very generous host and sweet. He got on the set and he chewed cigars and he would look around thinking, who can I destroy? Do you know, he really was a dreadful man. And he made this film, which I think was probably the worst film made in Kenya. And as I had made the best film, which I think made in Kenya, it was awfully unhappy for my last film to be the worst film.
Which was the best one?
The Last Safari. The best one was King Solomon's Mine.
Yes.
And I think this last one was a terrible one. And I more or less saw the writing on the wall that I wasn't being offered the best part. I really had sort of cut my own throat, because in Europe, when I had this divorce, I was very unhappy. And I just took anything. I did anything because it was tax-free. The first time in my life I'd ever worked for tax-free money. And I sort of, anybody who came up with the dough, I did. And you can't do that. You've got to protect your career. Mm-hmm. You know? So I said, well, that's it. I hung up my gloves.
Right.
And didn't do any more films, really.
Another record.
Right. Let's have that one I had 34 years ago, because I still love it, is the Beethoven Emperor Concerto.
Which movement?
Well, I don't know. The slow movement. Let's have the slow movement.
That was the one you chose before.
I had 34 years ago.
The slow movement from Beethoven's Emperor Concerto, number 5 in E-flat, once again Arthur Rubinstein and the London Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Daniel Barenboim. Now, you're a man of many interests, Jimmy, and these interests seem to have been slotted into phases in your career. In your days as a star of British films, you were rather into the English country gentleman image, shooting and all that, field sports.
Johnny Mills and I became country gentlemen.
Yes.
Actually, it's the only thing that kept me sane was the gardens, and I had a couple of horses.
Yes. Then there was the spell of luxury yachting with Michael Wiley.
That came a little later, when, so again, we rather like the south of France. This is the period when my marriage has gone wrong, and I had to disappear while the divorce is going through. And Mike and I loved the south of France. And look here, we're two big movie stars, right? And we should be able to afford to, you know. But it was so expensive in these hotels. We said, let's buy a boat, you see. We'll have the boat, we'll live on the boat. Cheap, you see. So we had this boat that we bought, an air sea rescue pinnace that we had converted. And eventually got to the south of France, where Mike and I never were on it together, because when I was working, he was free. When he was, when I was free, he was working. We never were on it together. But during that period, which in a strange way was a very romantic, although sad, because the one marriage had gone wrong. But I was then, after the divorce, met Jean, you see, and had the boat and had her down there. And it was a very romantic period. I remember taking Jean once to Antibes. Mm. And this lady was singing, whom we'll hear next, Edith Piaf. And this record reminds me of that whole period. So why don't we play that?
Village au fond de la vallée, comme égaré, presque ignoré. Voici quand la nuit étoilée, un nouveau-né nous aide beau petit ange, demain tu seras ma vie. Une cloche sonne, sonne, sa voix d'écho en écho, dit au monde qui s'étonne, c'est pour Jean-François Nicot, c'est pour accueillir une âme, une fleur qui s'ouvre au jour, à peine une flamme, encore faible qui réclame protection, tendresse, amour.
Les Trois Cloches with Les Compagnons de la Chanson and Edith Piaf. Now, you are on this little island.
Yes.
And you've travelled so much in primitive parts in Africa, you should have some ideas of putting up a waterproof shelter for a start.
A waterproof shelter?
Yes.
Well, what have I got?
Well, you've got whatever's on the island. You've got palm leaves, you've got wood.
Oh, yes, that's easy, yes.
What are you going to eat? You a good fisherman?
Yes.
Are you good at campfire cookery?
I'm good at all cookery, like so many men. I'm not a bad cook, a messy cook, you know.
Yes,
I must
not
have
cleaning up afterwards.
I must have something to clean up, because I manage to use more pots than anybody, you know.
You've been a boat owner. Do you know about navigation?
Yes.
Would you try to get away? Would you try to construct some kind of craft, a raft
I
or
think
something
these
of that
lovely
sort?
records, after a time, would drive me up the wall, you know. I mean, they're gorgeous records to hear now.
Yes.
But after, you know, a month, 2-3 months, you know, I think I'd want to get off that island.
Let's have your last record.
It was funny because I wanted to play My Way, because it's sort of slightly indicative of my life, the words of My Way. And I said to you, sung by almost anybody but Frank Sinatra. And you remember we couldn't get anybody singing it as well as Frank Sinatra.
That's
and I
true.
think Frank Sinatra is the most incredible singer. But I got slightly disillusioned with him when I was in Rome and he was there. And when you're a big star like he is, I mean, at a lesser degree I was a star, you have to sign autographs. You have to have the paparazzi take photographs. It's part of your job. And I didn't like the way Frank had his bodyguards who would push people aside and take the cameras and smash them. I thought this was disgraceful. So I slightly off him. So I said to you as a joke, I love My Way, sung by almost anybody except Frank Sinatra, but I will give him this. He sings it better than anybody.
And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. My friend, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. I've lived a life that's full. I traveled each and every highway, and more, much more than this, I did it my way. Regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. I did what I had to do, saw it through without exemption. I planned each charted course, each careful step along the byway, and more, much more than this, I did it my way. Yes, there were times, I'm sure you knew, when I bit off more than I could chew. But through it all, when there was doubt, I ate it up and spit it out.
My Way by Frank Sinatra. If you could take only one disc, which would it be?
That's difficult, isn't it? I think it'd have to be the classic, the great classic. It'd have to be Beethoven, wouldn't it? Beethoven.
The Beethoven
must be.
Emperor Concerto.
Yes.
And one luxury to take to the island, nothing of any practical use.
Oh, you've pulled one. I haven't thought of that at all. One luxury.
Yes.
A blonde?
No, must be inanimate.
Oh,
We've got
must be-
rules about all this. Even inanimate blondes, no.
No, I thought I could make it very inanimate. There's something that I travel with. I have done for 22 years. My great hero during the war was Churchill. I mean, I thought this man was absolutely fantastic. And Neiman did this sculpture of Churchill, which is in, I believe it's in House of Parliament, isn't it? The Neiman sculpture of Churchill. And Asprey was clever enough to have Neiman do some miniatures. I think he did 50 in gold and 200 in silver. And I had a few bob spare, and I went into Asprey's and I bought one of gold of this little model of this lovely man, Churchill. And I've traveled everywhere. Wherever I go, he goes in the bag with me, and he's out on the dresser in a hotel or wherever it is. I see Churchill. And I think probably I'd take him.
Yes, I've seen that. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful, isn't it? But I mean, he was such a... It's not that the thing is beautiful. It reminds you of this incredible man who, he had all the failures and pushed down, and he, at the time we needed, didn't he? He came up, and there he was, and wonderful, wonderful person.
And one book for the island. One book apart from the Bible and Shakespeare.
Well, when I was terribly young, I haven't read them recently, but I was mad about a man called Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway.
Right.
And there is a book called The Collected Works of Ernest Hemingway, and I think I'd probably take that.
Can you get all
Yes.
in one volume?
Yes, there's a great, big, fat book which has got, I think, everything of Ernest Hemingway, including short stories.
All right, the biggest book of Ernest Hemingway's
the most
works
of
that
Ernest
you can
Hemingway I
find.
can get, yeah.
And thank you, Stuart Granger, for letting us hear your Desert Island discs.
Thank you, Roy.
Goodbye, everyone.